Hey, it's Professor Streeter. Good to see you. Good evening. I enjoyed seeing many of you today at our virtual class, our first try, and we had a good constructive conversation about the second essay topics and just got to see each other and talk. It was good. We're going to do that again on Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m. The proposal for the essay is due tomorrow in the assignment folder. And if you're having trouble with that, just send me an email. I'm not expecting you to have a fully worked out topic, but the first part of this assignment is for you to try to come up with a topic of your own and see where you get with that. I sent you some emails, but see where you get, and I will give you some feedback starting next week about your proposal. If you don't know what you want to do at all, send me an email and I can help you think about it. Okay? So for tonight's video, I am going to talk about the Ramayana, and I've got a PowerPoint slideshow, and I'm going to talk through it. The notes, many of the things I'll say are in the notes that I already provided for you, but there's some interesting imagery here, some pictures of paintings and sculptures, and so I thought it'd be interesting to look at the visuals. Okay. I'm going to cut directly to the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to be in the rest of this video. You'll just hear me. Okay, here we go. So, R.K. Narayan is a writer, an Indian writer, and he published this translation of the Ramayana in 1972, not that long ago, a year after I was born. And so what I'd like to do is sort of introduce you to the text and talk a little bit about the Hindu mythology that is sort of in the background of the story of Rama and Sita. Okay, so first, some historical context. The oral tradition of the Ramayana, which, like the Odyssey, by the way, is sort of the story of Odysseus. The Odyssey is the story of Odysseus. The Ramayana is the story of Rama, Lord Rama. And that story has an oral tradition that dates back to around 1500 before the Common Era. So BCE means before the Common Era, before Christ, we used to say. So around 1500 before the Common Era, these stories began to be told all across India, but in northern India and southern India. There were different versions of the stories in different dialects, but some version of this story began being told around that time, and continued to be told and retold, and different versions developed in different parts of India for about 1,000 years. And this led up to the period of sort of the height of ancient Hindu culture. So around 500 BCE for about 1,000 years to around 500 year of the Common Era. So it's about a 1,000-year period. We see the flourishing of Hindu law books and Hindu epics, sort of not only the Ramayana but the Mahabharata and other epics are being written and are being told and developed over the course of this 1,000-year period. We also see the development of Hindu philosophy, the 6 orthodox systems of Hindu philosophy. So there's a lot of literature written during this time, from about 500 BCE to around 500 of the Common Era. The Hindu culture is known for its extensive legal theories, literature, many epics, and kind of really worked out philosophies, systems of philosophy, 6 of them. Now, the standard version of Ramayana that we've come to know, written in the ancient language of Sanskrit, the earliest version that we have, the earliest written version that we have, goes back to around 100 before the Common Era. There probably were earlier versions, but this is the one that we have, by a poet named Valmiki. I don't pronounce the Sanskrit very well, but his name is Valmiki, And that's the first sort of extant, complete version of the poem that we have in Sanskrit, again, around 100 before the Common Era. And I just want to look at the history of India after the writing of the Ramayana by Valmiki. We have a period around 300 to 500 of the Common Era. We have the period called the Gupta period in Indian history, which is considered the golden age of strong Hindu kings. So going back to the earlier slide, right, around 500 BCE, we have the kind of flourishing of Hindu philosophy and law and literature. And that corresponds pretty well to the time in ancient Greece, where we have the flourishing of ancient Greek philosophy, like Plato and Aristotle, and also ancient Greek theater, right? The great playwrights like Sophocles. And Athens is the center of Greek culture around that time. It's an early form of democracy, sort of a very flourishing city culturally. A lot of the Western ideas about democracy go back to that period in ancient Athens, ancient Greek history. But around the same time, we have a similarly flourishing culture in India. Not as democratic a culture, but philosophically just as sophisticated, and the legal systems put in place there were just as elaborate as the legal systems we saw later in Rome, and the literature, right? Flourishing literature during that period. So it's interesting, both in ancient Greece and in ancient India, we have the kind of this height, this sort of golden age of culture. But here, going to around 300 to 500 in the Common Era, we have the golden age of strong political leaders, strong kings, right? It's a time of strength and power and of the sovereigns. That gives rise about 500 years later or so, starting in around 962, the Turks from the north begin a conquest of the northern part of India, right? And Turkey, present-day Turkey, this is where in ancient times, the Trojan War was supposed to have taken place. The war between the Greeks and the Trojans took place in what is now Turkey. But at this time, we have a kind of an Islamic state in Turkey, and so and a very powerful army that conquers the northern part of India. And this is where we see the rise of Islam in India, around 962 to 1200. This is the sort of height of the medieval period. And it's right around this time that the southern Indian poet Kamban writes a version of the Ramayana in the language of Tamil. Tamil is a language that is indigenous to southern India. Sanskrit was the language of northern India, and that was a language that was brought into India from the north. Tamil is a more indigenous language, and so the version that Kamban writes kind of draws on more indigenous customs and traditions and culture in the south of India. Now, this is the version that Narayan is sort of working from as he develops his modern prose version. So Narayan is from the south of India, and so he was more inspired by Kamban's Tamil version of the text. Okay, not the original standard Sanskrit version of the text written by Valmiki, quite a bit earlier, right? So this is a medieval text, right, written around 1200, okay? But going back in the slides, right, the first version was around 100 BC. So around 1300 years separate the writing of the Valmiki Sanskrit version and the writing of the Kamban Tamil version. And Narayan has read both and he's influenced by both, but he's kind of working more in the spirit of the Kamban version. Okay. So then moving forward in history, in the medieval history of India, we have what's called the Delhi Sultanate for about 300 years. And this is the rise and reign of a strong Islamic state in the north of India, which is then expanded into the Mughal Empire, right? So the reign of the Mughal emperors from around 1500 to, and this is about 300-year reign. this is where the Islamic empire extends throughout all of India. India becomes an Islamic state, not a Hindu state, right? And so many practitioners of Hinduism are persecuted, but over time, the Islamic state and the Islamic religion and the Hindu religion, they kind of form a sort of synthesis, or they come to get along over time. But there's lots of friction, obviously. And so by 1858, the last Mughal emperor is finally deposed. That's a long reign of an Islamic emperor in the country of India, from about 1526 till 1858, when the last Mughal emperor is deposed. And that's the moment where India becomes a British colony. So it's interesting, the history of India is the history of conquest, right? First the Turks, right, come down and conquer the north part of India. Then the Delhi Sultanate, a kind of Islamic state, takes over North India. This gives rise to the Mughal Empire, an Islamic empire that extends throughout the whole of India. This goes on for 700 years. And then finally, India becomes a British colony in 1947. And so that leads up to the present, excuse me. So from 1947 until now, right, India, after World War II, declares independence from Britain. But then very quickly, and this is the long-standing sort of division between the Hindu culture and the Islamic culture in India. It had been fairly peaceful for many centuries, but frictions arose, especially after World War II, and during that period of time, during the World Wars. And so finally, India and Pakistan split into separate countries in 1947. Pakistan becomes a Muslim country. India remains a largely Hindu country, although there are many Muslims in India, many different religions in India. India has always been, until more recently, a very open, inclusive culture. So then we have the last note in the timeline, which began in 1500 BCE. Now in 1972, the South Indian writer Narayan writes this prose version of Kamban's Ramayana that you have been looking at, that you've been reading, that you have in your hands. So what I've showed you here is sort of where the text comes from and how far back in time it goes. I'm going to pause here, and we'll come back and complete the slideshow in the next video.